Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we can meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing a man named Jeffree Herbert Bothee. He was a convicted stalker who broke into his ex-girlfriend's home with a bomb, only to end up being killed himself. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week like this week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. So let's go ahead and get into this video. When I was looking up stalker cases for the series that I'm currently working on, I found that there were so many cases that, well, first off, there were just so many cases I was able to find because stalking is far more common than I think anybody realizes. But when cases were coming up for me and I was reading about them, I found that it was very, very common as well for the person being stalked to be seriously hurt or killed before their case was taken seriously. And that is almost what happened here. After stalking his ex-girlfriend for a year, even after getting warnings from police and even warnings from a judge, Jeffree broke into her home while she was away on vacation and waited for her with a plan that people believe was a plan to commit a murder-suicide. But fortunately in this case, Lauren did not lose her life, which was very lucky for her considering her stalker broke into her home and detonated an explosive device in her house. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details, but I was going to say that usually I want you to have all the details before you answer, but in this case my question is pretty general, and it's just like, what do you think causes a person to get to the point that Jeffree did, where he felt like there were no other options but to do something this drastic after becoming so obsessed with somebody? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Or you can put the answer down now, since I don't know if the details are really going to, well, yeah, they will. Wait till you get the details of the case, yeah. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of Jeffree Bothee, the convicted stalker who broke into his ex-girlfriend's house with a bomb, only to end up killed himself. Our story today begins on November 9th, 2004 in a place called Kentwood. Kentwood is a small city in Michigan with less than 55,000 people, and I looked up photos. It's cute, it's quaint, it's green, it's bordered by the Grand Rapids. It's nice. It was on this day at around 8:15 in the morning that police responded to a home invasion in progress located at the 5000 block of Greensboro Drive Southeast. Basically what happened here is a 53-year-old woman named Lauren had been gone away on vacation and she was just getting home. She entered her home at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and when she went inside, she was shocked to find that her ex-boyfriend, who was recently convicted of stalking her, was inside her home, and this was 52-year-old Jeffree Bothee. Being terrified, because it would already be scary to find somebody in your home, right, when you're not expecting them to be there, but for it to be somebody who had been harassing you for an extended period of time that you had to bring the law into, it was horrifying for her. So she immediately booked it. She left the house and she ran to a neighbor's house where she called 911. So police arrived to the ranch-style home having an idea of what they're walking into, or so they think, right? There's a guy in the house, they know he's a stalker, it's a whole thing. So they go in, they confront Jeffree in an altercation. It starts as a conversation. It quickly turns into an altercation where the police may or may not have sprayed Jeffree with a chemical spray. It says they may have, but that means they probably did. And that would already be bad, but it got even worse when Jeffree was cornered in the basement of this home, because that's when he set off an explosive device. And remember, all this is happening at like 8:30 in the morning. So let's talk about how we ended up in this very extreme situation. Now, this case wasn't really heavily reported on just across the board. There were some articles that came out online back in 2004, but when you go to try to read the articles now, they're gone. I hate that that's a thing. If you've ever tried to research a case, you will have seen this, that you'll see like an article reference, you click the link to go see this article, and poof, it's just disappeared. Like things get wiped from the web, which I thought nothing could ever be wiped from the web, but apparently just the things that you want eventually get wiped from the web. So I will tell you what I was able to find out about Jeffree, about Lauren, about the lead up here, but I'll let you know now, there isn't a ton of information about Lauren specifically. She really stayed out of the media after this happened. She just went about her life, living her life, trying to heal from the trauma that this must have caused her. But that's why I'm not going to talk a lot about her backstory or anything like that. I'm just going to be quoting things that she put in legal documents. But I only found one article that even had her full name, and I'm not even going to use her last name here because she seems like she just wants to like get on with her life and do her thing. So if you're wondering like why I'm not going into all the history of the victim here, which you know I like to do, that's why there really isn't that much information at all. Now, from everything I was able to read about this case, it seems that people were across the board completely shocked to hear that this happened because Jeffree, who went by Jeff to his friends, was said to be just like a good guy. He was a loyal husband who had been married for like a super long time. He was a very attentive and loving father. Like his son's name was Miles, was his world. Like this was his whole heart. And he was a man who was also like very active in his community. There were no red flags with him. In his free time, he liked to work with kids. He volunteered as a soccer coach for the AYSO and Select and was an assistant scoutmaster for like, I don't know, the Cub Scouts or the Boy Scouts. Are those the same thing? I don't know. That sort of thing though. And that's probably so that he could be close with his son Miles because Miles was in the Scouts and he had rose to the rank of Eagle Scout. And Jeff was said to just be very, very proud of his son. Jeff was said to be a man who loved the great outdoors. He was the type of person who really liked going camping, but he would do like the real old school rustic camping. He wasn't a glamping type of guy. So he would do that in the summers. And then in the winters, he'd like to do winter sports. He would do snow shoeing, snow shoveling. Is that a sport? I don't know, but he did it. And he would even do like cross-country skiing. When I said snow shoveling, I just went and checked my notes. It was snowmobiling, which is a very different thing than snow shoveling, but you know, I'm from Los Angeles and we don't get snow, so I'm just doing my best with my limited information on snow. In addition to those things that Jeff liked to do, another thing that he was really into was he worked as a pro rally racer, which, okay, I had to look this up because I don't know what that is either. And from what I was able to deduce, this is like, okay, I think it's when you race little cars with another person and you fly down a hill like as fast as you can and you aren't racing another person at the same time, like there aren't multiple cars, you're just trying to go as fast as you can, like it's a timed sport. So that's something that he did, and he also worked on crews of other people who did that. And this seems to be another thing that he shared with his son, that his son has gone on to continue doing after his father's death, or at least did for some time after his father was killed. Jeff was a reliable person. He was a guy who had a stable job. He had worked at the same company for 21 years. This was a company called Steelcase where he worked on taking care of roofs. And he was said to be like a very gentle soul, a very soft man. Not like soft, like he wasn't like manly, but you know what I mean? Just like soft, like a sweet person. So why would he go on to do what he did? Well, it turns out this all actually links back to Steelcase, the place where he had worked for almost 2 decades, because it was while working there that he met a woman who would go on to be the subject of his obsession that we're talking about today. So Jeffree and Lauren were both longtime employees of this company, and they had actually worked together for 10 years, like an entire decade, before their friendship kind of blossomed and they developed feelings for each other, and they started having more of a romantic relationship around November of 2002. Now, the problem here, you may remember, is I said he was a married family man. He had been married for a long time to a woman, I believe her name was Holly, and they had been married like 30 years when he and Lauren started having their workplace romance. So the two started dating, but it was a short relationship because after just 3 months, Lauren realized that this really wasn't what she wanted. So she started to sort of pull away from Jeffree. And I don't know if this is related at all to the relationship the two had, or if there's any sort of connection here, but at around the same time that relationship was ending, Jeffree actually got let go. After 21 years, he was let go from the company Steelcase. So I can only imagine how hard that would be, because not only is your relationship ending and you're losing your job, but the job was the place where he could still, see her. So even if the relationship ended, he could kind of have that grace period where he would still see her around, where now it's ending and he's losing the job, so he's not going to see her at all. And Lauren said this was very hard for him, that this was like him grieving and suffering two losses at the same time, and he was not dealing well with this. He pretty soon after started threatening to take his own life, even going as far as telling Lauren that he was going to film the process of doing so and then send her the tape so she had to see it, which logistically, I don't know how that would be possible because you couldn't really send it after doing what he was going to do, but this is what he told her. And this was definitely disturbing for her to hear, regardless of whether or not he could actually do something like that. And I can definitely say that it was not successful in making her want to take him back. Those things never really are they? So that's already bad for Jeffree. That's already a lot to deal with at once. But when it rains, it pours, because around this time as well, his relationship with his wife fell apart. His marriage, it wasn't going well already, obviously, if he's cheating, and it doesn't say online specifically like what caused the breakup, who initiated it, all that. But I mean, there are a lot of context clues as to why somebody might want to end the marriage, and this was really, really just like another thing going wrong for Jeffree when everything was already falling down around him. He was losing his whole life. And to lose a long-term spouse, it's not just losing one thing. It's not like, oh, this relationship's over, that sucks. This is losing everything. They've been together forever. This is losing your wife, probably your best friend, somebody who knows you better than anybody. It's losing your family. It's losing the images you had for your future. It's losing your security, your comfort, everything. And again, he didn't handle this well. It's kind of like losing his wife made him ramp up with his communication with Lauren. He was calling her constantly. He was sending her messages constantly, telling her that she was like the root of all evil and the cause for all of his pain. And she finally got to a point where she was like, I'm done like dealing with this. This is harassment. This is too much. We were together 3 months. Like, get over it, bro. So she actually went to the cops. And this is when the Kentwood police decided that after hearing her story of what was going on, their solution was going to be to call him. Yes, they called him and they were like, hey, Jeffree, why don't you knock it off, bud? And that was pretty much the extent of what they did. Now, surprisingly, and I say surprisingly in a non-ironic way, this was a little effective. For a little bit of time, he did stop contacting her. And she was like, oh, cool, I'm finally going to have a break. And she didn't hear from him for a little while. But then after some time passed, she heard from his father, which I thought was so strange, but he didn't reach out to her. He had his father reach out to her, which feels inappropriate, but I don't know the relationship there. Apparently the two talked though, her and Jeffree's father. And what they said isn't listed online as well, because again, this wasn't really reported on. But what it did say is that he insisted that she start talking to Jeffree again. And whatever he said to her must have resonated with her, because after 2 weeks, she actually did. She started communicating with him again. And it doesn't seem like it was in a romantic way. It seems like it was more in a friendly way. But Jeffree took this as his in and immediately became too much right away. And it made her go, okay, I definitely made a mistake here. So she tried to completely cut him off and pull away 100%. And whenever she did, he would become overbearing and threatening. She could see that he was escalating. And he even told her, like, I'm going to move to your area. I may stop by. You might want to borrow a gun from somebody so that you can kill me. This is what he's telling her. So it got to be too much, and it was in September of 2003 that she finally decided to apply for a personal protection order. And she actually ended up applying for, and I believe receiving 3 from September of 2003 to when he broke into her home in November of 2004. So she took out one in September of 2003, one in August of 2004, and then another one in October of 2004, just days before he broke into her home. In her request for the restraining order, which the last one she requested was October 28th. Okay, so this is what she said in her October 28th restraining order application. And, he went on to do this just days later. She said that he was threatening her, that he was threatening himself. He was saying that he was going to either, take his own life or take her life. And she said that he was nuts and he wasn't getting any better. And then she said specifically, quote, the only way Jeff is going to stay away from me is if he can be incarcerated again. He refuses to leave me alone. I can't live like this. Now, what she meant by this when she said he'd need to be incarcerated again is because months earlier in February of 2004, after she had gotten a restraining order against him, he violated the restraining order. So she called the cops and he was arrested, and he was charged with aggravated stalking and violating a restraining order, obviously. And he was put in jail, and he served a whopping 45 days before he was released and simply given 2 years of probation. But this didn't matter because even when he was on probation, he still called her, he still sent her messages, he would not leave her alone. And speaking of his probation anyway, so he ended up having his probation officer changed to an officer in Oceana County instead of Kent because of where he lived, or the address he had listed. So basically the crime that we're talking about today was committed in Kent or Kentwood, but where he was living at the time, since he and his wife were splitting, was sort of a gray area. But his last known address was in Pentwater, which was in Oceana County. So he switches to this new probation officer, and there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect here. They didn't get to know each other well. They actually only met one time before this crime was committed. They met. Jeff didn't seem to have a problem. They were on limited supervision anyway, so he was only going to be seeing Jeff once a month, and Jeff seemed to be very cooperative, so all was good. His probation officer said of this, quote, "All I can say, at the time we met, he met the requirements of his probation to this office. That's all I can say." Which I guess is technically true, except Jeff did have a scheduled probation officer meeting a week before he broke into his ex-girlfriend's house and was inevitably killed, and he actually missed this meeting. So Jeff was having a hard time, and he was having a harder time than anyone knew. They knew he had depression, they knew he was on medication, and they knew he was seeing a counselor at the time, but his family, his ex-wife, the mother of his son, his long-term wife, and his son said that they thought that he was getting better. For the 6 months prior to this taking place, he seemed to be getting better. They thought that he was getting stronger, but clearly that wasn't the case, or we wouldn't be talking about it today. So what we know about what happened is that on November 9th, 2004, Lauren was away on vacation, so he decided that that was the perfect time for him to move forward with his plan. So he broke into her house at about 3 a.m., so, hours before this happened, because this happened at about 8:30. So he breaks in, he hangs out in her house, he gets on her computer, uses her internet, sends an email, and then he rigs her basement to explode at the touch of a wire. At a little after 8 a.m., Lauren comes home. She enters the house. She finds Jeff inside. She says, "Not to fucking day," and she hightails it out of there, running to a neighbor's house where she calls 911. The police show up at her home, and as they enter, they encounter Jeff. There is an altercation that results in Jeff detonating a 40-foot length of explosive detonation cord once he was cornered in the basement. Again, this is 8:30 in the morning. The reports say that the bomb went off at 8:28. Has anyone even had their coffee yet? It's always so crazy to me when things like this happen in broad daylight, because I'm like, how can you do something like this when you can see everything around you? It seems wild to me, but the bomb goes off, and apparently it wasn't that bad, which to me, I'm like, a bomb, any bomb seems kind of bad. And I mean, it's a bomb, so it is kind of bad. But as far as bombs go, it wasn't that bad, because though some officers were injured, nobody was seriously injured. Several officers were taken to the hospital with injuries that were described as minor, but they had things that ranged from loss of hearing, minor lacerations from the shrapnel that came out of the bomb, burns and blisters from the flash flame, and punctured eardrums that resulted in bleeding, which to me, that sounds serious. But apparently, even the sound of the explosion wasn't that gnarly, because a neighbor said that they heard the noise, but they didn't even realize it was an explosion. The neighbor said of this, quote, "I just heard a boom. But you know what? I hear that every time the garbage man passes the house. So honestly, that's what I thought it was. I didn't know it was that severe." Anyways, the explosion explodes, and the officers are kind of, a little bit hurt, mostly dazed, and they're trying to collect themselves. And this is when one of the officers, his name was David Helm, he looks over and he sees Jeff, and he believes that he sees Jeff move, and he thinks that Jeff's going for, he thinks that Jeff's wearing explosives strapped to his body, and he thinks he's going to set off another bomb. So, fearing for his life and the lives of the other officers, he opens fire, and he fires 10 rounds, hitting Jeff 3 times. 3 of the bullets actually hit Jeff in his chest and in his abdomen. Now, it is worth mentioning that Jeff's son has come out since and said that, there were no explosives strapped to his father's body. And when I read newspapers on newspapers.com, the few that there were about this, it said that there actually was no second explosive device. So whatever David saw wasn't what he thought he saw, so there wasn't a second bomb to go off in the first place. And speaking of his son, I forgot to mention this. It's so sad, though. but his son, Miles, learned about his father's death on the news, like on the morning news. Can you even imagine that? You're just like having breakfast. It's a Tuesday morning. You turn on the news and you learn that your father has been killed. I can't imagine what that's like, but they were reporting on it because like it was news in the area. People wanted to know what was going on, and the police chief gave a statement to the press where he said, quote, "All we know at this time is the suspect detonated an explosion and injured all 5 of our officers. It appears that he was attempting to detonate another explosive, and one of the officers fired upon him with his service weapon." But at this time, they actually didn't know yet if Jeff was killed by the shots from the officer or if he was killed due to injuries from the initial explosion, because he was like closer to it when it happened. So the public was going to have to wait for an autopsy to determine like what actually killed him. Now back to the house. The officers at this point are not convinced that there are no other explosives still in the house. So they actually flee from the home. They're like, this is not what we thought we were getting into first off when we came here. When we came to this house, we thought it was just a home invasion, and now it's an explosion, and we are just normal cops. So they fled while they waited for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to show up, and also the Grand Rapids Police Department. It's just so wild to imagine being in this situation because they had no idea what they were going into, you know? They thought that they were just coming to arrest a guy who was taking part in a home invasion. They thought they were gonna have to like reach out to his probation officer and like give him a slap on the wrist. But instead, it's 8:30 in the morning and you are being blown up. So the officers dip. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms shows up along with the fire department because the explosion actually did cause a fire, but fortunately they were able to keep the fire just located at like the bottom level. I can't speak today. The bottom level of the home. But because there was an explosion, neighbors around the home were evacuated along with a elementary school nearby. The Glenwood Elementary School was locked down and students were kept inside for 2 hours because the whole area was just chaos. But those weren't even the only evacuations because investigators started investigating. And just before noon, they actually discovered Jeffree's car. It was like it was described as a dirt covered car. I don't know if he was out off-roading or what, but they find his car and it's at like a local shopping center. And because of where it was found, they also had to evacuate a grocery store. So they bring a dog. They do bring a dog. They bring a drug sniffing dog who tries to scope out the situation. But he actually wasn't a drug sniffing dog. He was a bomb sniffing dog. He sniffs around, and there are different reports on if he found anything. One report said that they found evidence of like an explosive device in the trunk, and then other reports say that they didn't find anything. So do with that what you will. Police also ended up searching a storage unit on Monroe Road that was in Jeff's name. His parents, I guess, gave permission for them to search this, but nothing was found there. And that's basically all they did in terms of searching. So all of this is happening, right? But in the meantime, Jeff's body is still inside Lauren's home because they had to wait for bomb experts from the Grand Rapids Police Department to come and, remove or safely detonate the second explosive device, which turns out didn't even exist. They even brought in a robot from Lansing to search the home and make sure there were no other bombs. So they search the home, there's no other bombs. They look on Jeff's body, and again, there were no other bombs, so his body was finally removed and it was taken to have an autopsy performed. That is when it was determined that he did not die as a result of the explosion. He was actually killed by the multiple gunshot wounds to his chest and abdomen that he received from police. It was also then that it was discovered that Jeff had a blood alcohol level of 0.10, a full 25% higher than the legal limit for driving. So why did this happen? They really don't know. And there was nothing in Jeff's history that was reported that would lead police to believe he had extensive knowledge of explosives, but obviously he knew something because he built this homemade explosive and even used a blasting cap to discharge it. So he had to know something. And that's really all they could tell. They couldn't tell what type of bomb it was or what type of explosive agent was used because the damage from the fire made it hard to figure any of this out. And the why is also elusive because prior to the stalking incident, Jeff didn't have any criminal record. The police chief from the town, Pentwater, where he, actually lived for so long, his name was Jack, he came out and said he didn't really even know who Jeff was and had no problems with him. And then he said specifically, quote, "I knew who he was. I knew that he kept an address here, but I don't think he lived here. I've seen him around town, but never had any fall-ins with him. He had nothing here with us, and I don't know anything about the man. People were just shocked, and honestly, some of them were even traumatized by what happened. Both people who were in homes that were around Lauren's home when it happened, and people that just heard about it. But of course, nobody is quite as traumatized or devastated by this loss as Lauren, of course, and also Jeffree's family and friends. One of his neighbors, this was a man named Dale, and he had known Jeff for 25 years, said that none of this made sense. To look at it, like, it was so out of character. He said that Jeff was not the type of guy to do anything violent at all. He wasn't even a big drinker. He was definitely not a drunk. So to know that he was drunk when this happened, to know that he was dealing with the loss of the job he'd been at forever, the loss of the marriage that he had been in forever, the loss of his new girlfriend who he had, tried to give up everything for, had to be some of the factors, but he also believed that there had to be mental illness at play here as well, because otherwise none of this makes sense to him at all. People seem to have two schools of thought as to what happened here and why, right? Some people believe that he went there with the intention of taking his own life, but by proxy of police. Basically that he was going to commit suicide by police, by going here, threatening them with a bomb, and then having them kill him, just like what happened. And then some people also believe that he was going there with the intention of committing a murder-suicide, where he would kill his ex-girlfriend and then kill himself. But we'll never really know the answer as to why this happened, because he's no longer here to ask. His son Miles has said that he knew his father was having trouble. He knew that his father was having trouble letting go, and he knew that his father was technically stalking this woman, but he just didn't realize how bad it had gotten. But for him, he chooses to remember his father as the man that he knew, which was to him a kind and gentle soul. And with that, my friends, is the story of Jeffree Bothee, the convicted stalker who broke into his ex-girlfriend's house with a bomb, only to end up being the only person to lose their life in this situation. I hope you found my telling of this to be informative, and I hope it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and discussing this case with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day. And this was a really general question here. And it was just this, like, what causes a person to get to this point, right? To get to this breaking point, to think that it's all or nothing and you have to do this, to give up your whole life, your child, any future that you could have. Like, what gets a person to this point of desperation? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I really do not understand this sort of mindset. If you haven't already, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases. Whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of, or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 weeks, like this week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership, where you get early access to non-sponsored videos, priority comment responses, things like that, and also a link to my merch store, because I finally reopened the merch store after you guys asked me so many times. So the link's down there for your convenience. And now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.